Imagine this. You're in a relationship that consumes you. At times, it feels like the summit of passion, intense, electric, overflowing with chemistry. Yet at other times, it's like navigating a minefield. Words wound deeper than silence. Simple gestures escalate into full-blown conflicts, and the mere need to breathe, to ask for space, becomes a source of guilt. Still, you stay, not out of convenience, not out of fear, but because something inside you clings to the belief that this love is worth it, that this chaos must mean something profound. But here's the truth. Most toxic relationships don't appear toxic in the beginning. They unfold in layers, subtly. They start with affection, commitment, and promises. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, affection morphs into control. Care becomes surveillance. Connection turns into dependency. You don't notice it happening. You just start to feel perpetually indebted, as if loving means shrinking. Maybe you've been there, or maybe you know someone stuck in that cycle. Someone who says, "He's just like that because he loves me too much," or "She's only acting this way because she's insecure. She means no harm." They defend behaviors that in truth are slowly draining the life from them. These are relationships where silence is punished, where saying no unleashes emotional blackmail, cold detachment, or unpredictable outbursts. Then comes the most dangerous part, self-doubt. Am I overreacting? Maybe I'm the problem. That's one of the most insidious aspects of a toxic dynamic. It distorts your grip on reality. It corrodes your self-trust. It convinces you that what you're experiencing is love, when what you're really doing is surviving. This isn't an accusation. It's not a condemnation. It's an invitation to take a hard, honest look at the dynamics we often mistake for love, but which may actually be poisoning our emotional well-being. Let's explore together the 7 psychological signs that you're in a toxic relationship through the lens of some of the most respected minds in psychology. This isn't going to be a reel of feel-good quotes or pop psychology tips. What you'll find here are raw, uncomfortable truths, the kind that can set you free. Sometimes all it takes to break free from a destructive pattern is to finally see it clearly. If you're ready to face that reality with courage, keep watching. What comes next may hurt, but it may also be the beginning of your liberation. Some of the most damaging relationships are also the hardest ones to leave. Why? Because they offer something deceptively rare and seductive: intensity. Emotional highs that feel like euphoria. Passionate reunions after explosive fights. Jealousy framed as proof of deep care. It feels like a whirlwind, unpredictable but thrilling, and every spike in emotion reinforces the illusion that there's something deep, something real. But intensity is not the same as love. This is one of the most dangerous misconceptions we carry. Freud described this through his concept of repetition compulsion, our unconscious drive to recreate emotional wounds from childhood. If you grew up in a home where affection was mixed with pain, where love was unstable and conditional, your brain might have internalized a belief: real love must hurt, must confuse, must destabilize. So when you enter a relationship fueled by emotional turbulence, you don't reject it, you recognize it. It feels familiar. Erich Fromm called this symbiotic love, where two individuals blur into one, believing they've achieved unity, when in fact they're trapped in dependency. In this fusion, chaos becomes routine. You mistake volatility for depth. You begin to think that if it hurts, it must mean something. It must be real. But here's the truth. Intensity is not love. It is imbalance. Healthy love is often calm, stable, even boring to those who are addicted to emotional adrenaline. And make no mistake, that addiction is very real. The brain releases dopamine in cycles of tension and relief. This biochemical loop mimics the pattern of drug dependence, creating a psychological craving for the very thing that's tearing you apart. You begin to equate love with chaos, passion with pain, devotion with losing yourself. And here lies the cruelest irony. This type of bond is powerful because it mimics depth. You think you've found someone who makes you feel more alive than anyone else. But what you're feeling isn't connection, it's the resurfacing of an old, unhealed wound. That's why the more intense it is, the harder it is to walk away. And when you start believing that your love can heal the other person, that your patience, your sacrifice, your staying power will eventually fix everything, you've stepped into the most dangerous phase of all. In the next part, we'll explore one of the most common and damaging patterns in toxic relationships, the savior complex. If any of this resonates with you so far, consider staying for the next section, because understanding this part might change everything. You begin to see the cracks, the emotional outbursts, the withdrawal, the erratic behavior, and something stirs inside you. A deep urge to heal, to rescue, to fix. Suddenly, the relationship isn't just emotional. It becomes a mission. You take on the role of the savior, the one who will be patient enough, kind enough, strong enough to lead the other person out of their darkness. But this isn't love. This is a trap disguised as compassion. The internal logic sounds noble. If I just love them enough, they'll change. If I hold on a little longer, they'll see how much I care. If I prove I won't abandon them, they'll finally feel safe. But this story isn't really about them. It's about you. It's about your own unresolved pain, your need to feel worthy, your hunger for validation. It's about trying to make sense of an old emotional wound by transforming someone else into a reflection of your own shadow. Carl Jung described this process with unflinching clarity: projection. We see in others the very things we deny in ourselves. We are drawn to people who mirror our disowned traits. If you suppress your own insecurity, you may be magnetically pulled to someone insecure, hoping to fix them, and in doing so, fix yourself. If you repress anger, you may be drawn to someone volatile, trying to soothe them, when in truth you're trying to manage the fire you've buried inside. Fromm called this dynamic neurotic love, a bond built not on freedom, but on need. A love that says, I only matter if I'm needed. I only deserve love if I sacrifice. And so the more you try to help, the more trapped you feel, the more resistance you face, the more you double down. When nothing changes, you don't blame the other person. You blame yourself for not doing enough. But here's the brutal truth. You're not in a relationship. You're in an emotional battlefield, fighting ghosts that don't belong to you, trying to save someone who may not even want to be saved. And the more you try to mend them, the more you fracture yourself. Then comes the most subtle, yet devastating shift. You begin to disappear. Your opinions fade. Your desires become blurry. Your needs irrelevant. Slowly, everything revolves around the other person. Their mood defines your day. Their chaos dictates your choices. You start walking on eggshells, censoring yourself, giving up little parts of your life, until nothing feels like yours anymore. In the next section, we'll explore this loss of self. It's one of the quietest, but most soul-destroying, signs of a toxic relationship. At first you remember who you were. You had a voice. clear desires, defined dreams, but over time, those parts begin to fade. What do you like? Depends. What do you want? Whatever they want. What do you feel? You're not even sure anymore. In toxic relationships, this disconnection from self doesn't strike like lightning. It creeps in, quietly, invisibly, until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person staring back. This is one of the deepest wounds of a toxic bond: identity erosion. Psychologist Erich Fromm called it symbiotic fusion, where two people cease to exist as individuals and instead merge into a singular, emotional organism. Your thoughts are theirs, your emotions revolve around their state. Their crises dictate your movements. You begin reshaping yourself to prevent conflict. You rehearse your sentences before speaking. You surrender small things, then bigger things, until nothing feels untouched. Here's where Freud's concept of ego repression enters the picture. When survival, emotional or otherwise, depends on pleasing someone else, we start silencing ourselves. You bury your frustration. You numb your discomfort. You suppress your own desires. Over time, you stop being a person with agency. You become a mirror, a chameleon, a shell molded by the emotional demands of another. This loss of self also shows up in subtle ways. You start dressing differently. You pull away from close friends. You abandon personal projects, all in the name of keeping the peace. But what you're really doing is erasing yourself, piece by piece, to keep the relationship alive. And that's a cost no one should pay. The most dangerous part: this doesn't feel like sharp pain. It feels like a dull ache, like apathy, like emptiness, like something's wrong, but you can't explain what. And when you finally try to reclaim space, to set a boundary, to say no, guilt rushes in. Suddenly, it feels selfish to want a night alone, to need time to think, to not reply instantly, to say, "I'm not okay." And that's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. How, in toxic dynamics, the basic human need for autonomy is twisted into emotional betrayal, and how guilt becomes a weapon of control. In a healthy relationship, space is not only allowed, it's essential. Silence is safe. Solitude is respected. Boundaries are understood as the architecture of mutual respect. But in a toxic relationship, something fundamental is reversed. Your need for space becomes a threat. Your silence is seen as rejection. Your autonomy is rebranded as selfishness. And what follows is guilt. Crushing, relentless, undeserved guilt. You begin to feel ashamed for wanting to sleep alone, guilty for not responding right away, uncomfortable for choosing to see friends without giving a full report. Loving yourself begins to feel like betrayal. And the most insidious part: the guilt isn't always imposed with words. It's embedded in tone, in silence, in the cold glance, or the subtle withdrawal of affection. Phrases like, "You've changed," "You don't care anymore," or worse, "If the roles were reversed, I'd never treat you like this." This emotional manipulation, according to Freud, ties directly to the punitive superego, a part of the psyche that internalizes critical voices and unrealistic moral standards. It punishes you not for doing something wrong, but simply for having needs. In toxic dynamics, your partner's reactions strengthen that internal critic. Over time, you begin to anticipate guilt before you even act. You self-censor. You deny your own wants before they fully form. You become emotionally hyper-vigilant, always calculating your next step, always trying to avoid triggering an outburst or a cold shoulder. and the result is suffocating. You stop breathing fully. You stop relaxing. You stop existing naturally. You become a filtered version of yourself, always agreeable, always present, always on. And behind this performance hides a deep-rooted belief that to love is to erase yourself. But what if that's not true? What if the stability you think you're responsible for isn't your job? What if the guilt you're carrying was never yours to begin with? These are the questions that lead us to the next realization. What happens when you no longer just feel guilty for leaving? You start to believe that someone else's pain is entirely your fault. You've probably thought about leaving, maybe even rehearsed the conversation in your head, imagined a life of quiet mornings, deep breaths, and peace that doesn't require permission. But then something stops you, not just fear of being alone, something deeper, the unbearable idea of their pain. Suddenly you're not just afraid of the breakup, you're afraid of breaking them. You tell yourself, they're going through a lot, they've been hurt before, they need me right now. And just like that, your role in the relationship shifts from partner to caretaker, from equal to emotional lifeline. This isn't just empathy, it's distorted emotional responsibility. You carry their suffering like a cross. You believe your absence would be cruel. You convince yourself their healing depends on your presence. But is that love, or is it an emotional prison dressed as compassion? Carl Jung warned of this dynamic through the lens of archetypes, particularly the martyr. You become so identified with easing another's pain that you forget your own existence. You sacrifice until there's nothing left to give. What looks noble on the surface often hides a dangerous disconnect from your own worth. Fromm described this too as neurotic love, the kind that survives not through choice, but through fear, through emotional dependency, through unresolved trauma. You're not staying because you want to. You're staying because you feel like you must. Every breakdown, every sob, every desperate plea, it strengthens the invisible chain. You feel needed, and if you're needed, maybe you're worth something. But here's the unflinching truth. You are not responsible for healing wounds the other refuses to face. Your love doesn't save them. It delays the inevitable for both of you. And the cruelest part, as you carry their pain, as you hold them up, you begin to feel something disturbingly familiar, a strange echoing déjà vu, as if you've been here before, not with this person, but with this feeling. That's because you have. And in the next section, we'll dive into why you keep repeating it, and why it feels like destiny. Have you ever felt like you're living the same story with different people? You promise yourself it'll be different this time. You've learned, you're stronger, you're wiser, and yet, it all loops again. The same wounds, the same silences, the same ache. This isn't coincidence, it's a pattern. Freud called it the repetition compulsion, an unconscious force that drives us to recreate unresolved childhood pain. Not because we enjoy suffering, but because we're trying, desperately, to rewrite the ending, to relive the old wound, but this time, to make it heal. Maybe you grew up surrounded by emotional absence, rejection, volatility, and now, as an adult, you find yourself drawn to the very people who offer more of the same. Because deep down, a voice says, this time, it'll be different. This time, they'll stay. This time, I'll be enough. Freud also introduced the concept of transference, projecting past emotional relationships onto present ones. You don't fall for someone distant by accident. That distance feels familiar. It activates something old, something unfinished. a script your inner child is still trying to revise. So when you meet someone who's emotionally unavailable, who mirrors the instability of someone from your past, it doesn't repel you. It pulls you in. You think that if you can just earn this person's love, it will finally fill the void left by that person's absence. But it doesn't work that way. You're not rewriting the ending. You're reliving the same pain with different costumes. And while you're busy trying to rescue that inner child, your present self is fading, drained, exhausted, breaking. Here's where the darkest twist emerges. You start to believe that pain is normal, that confusion is romantic, that peace is boring. You think calm love isn't real love because it doesn't trigger your wounds. And even when you know what's happening, even when the pattern becomes obvious, you still hesitate to leave. Why? Because there's something more terrifying than repeating the pain, not knowing who you'd be without it. And that's exactly what we'll explore in the final section, the fear of emptiness that follows the idea of breaking free. Have you ever imagined your life without them? Not in anger, not in the heat of a fight, but in a quiet moment, just you and your thoughts, envisioning freedom, waking up in peace, going to bed without tension, living without second-guessing every word, every step, every breath. And maybe you've smiled at the thought, but then the emptiness creeps in, a chill in your chest, a whisper in your mind. What if I'm nothing without them? What if I never find someone again? What if this pain is all there is? That fear is real, and it's one of the most paralyzing forces in toxic relationships. Often, it has less to do with how much you love them, and more to do with how little you feel connected to yourself. Carl Jung spoke about this in terms of the fragile ego, a sense of self that hasn't fully individuated. When your identity fuses with another person, walking away doesn't feel like losing a partner. It feels like losing yourself. Without them, you don't know who you are. They became your mirror, and if they're gone, what's left? Jung also said that many people don't love from a place of freedom. They love to escape. Escape the fear of being alone. Escape the mirror of self-reflection. Escape the silence that echoes with questions we've avoided our whole lives. This kind of love isn't love. It's anesthesia. You stay, not because it feels good, but because the unknown feels worse than the pain you've come to accept. But that's not cowardice. It's the scar of a wound. No one taught you how to heal. Maybe no one ever showed you how to be with yourself without abandoning yourself, how to honor your boundaries without guilt, how to love yourself without needing someone else to make you feel alive. But here's the truth. You'll only be able to experience true love when you no longer have to lose yourself to keep it. Love should not crush you. It should not erase you. It should expand you. It should bring you closer to your essence, not further from it. So maybe it's time to stop asking, what's wrong with me? And instead ask, why am I still calling this love? You deserve something deeper, something steady, something sacred. But before you look for it in someone else, you must find it within. Because courage isn't walking away without pain. Courage is staying loyal to yourself, even when everything around you tries to make you forget who you are. Now I want to hear from you. Which part of this reflection was the hardest to face? Which section opened your eyes to something that had been hiding in plain sight? Share it in the comments. Sometimes writing it down is the first act of breaking the cycle. And if this video brought you clarity, don't stop here. The next one is just as important, maybe more. It reveals another piece of this puzzle. Your journey to emotional freedom is only just beginning.